Welcome to Issues and Answers with your host, Diane. Issues and Answers is presented as a public service to inform, educate, and better the lives of New Mexicans. And now, Issues and Answers with your host, Diane.
Welcome to the program. I'm Diane. Do you like freedom in your life? Well, when we're looking at this upcoming election, are you thinking that maybe our freedoms are going to be taken away or we're going to get more of them? Well, sometimes when you vote for a lot of government, there's not as much liberty, but a lot of government. So that's something to think about this upcoming election. Well, on the show today, we're going to talk to Paul Gessing, the president of the Rio Grande Foundation. And of course, its mission is to increase liberty and prosperity by informing citizens of the importance of individual freedom, limited government, and economic opportunity. Sounds good, doesn't it? Well, it does sound good, if you believe it sounds good, and you have a chance to vote for that in this upcoming election. So on the program today, Paul and I are going to discuss the election. We're going to discuss the special session on crime that didn't happen, and how much money do we have coming from the oil and gas industry, and what does that mean for your and my life? A lot to talk about in the next half hour with Paul Gessing from the Rio Grande Foundation. Right after this, stay with us. My guest today, Paul Gessing from the Rio Grande Foundation. He's been a guest here many times. You can hear him on the radio all over the place. He brings in speakers to talk about topics of liberty, prosperity, and economic development, and a better life. Isn't that what your foundation is all about?
Exactly.
Paul Gessing.
Yes, absolutely. We believe that individuals, rather than government, can best manage their lives and their resources, and that those individuals here in New Mexico should be empowered to do that rather than having government constantly telling them do this, do that, and taking our money for the privilege, so to speak.
Our money, our hard-earned money that we give as taxpayers to the government.
Absolutely.
Just to tell us what to do.
Yes.
Big election coming up, Paul Gessing,
Yes.
across the nation and here in the States. And what's your philosophy with the Rio Grande Foundation about our responsibility to make choices? And if you want change, and make choices that you haven't been making for the past 30, 40, 50 years.
Right. Well, Rio Grande Foundation is a nonpartisan organization, so we don't take a position on who you should vote for. So we try to inform voters, inform the population. First and foremost, people should vote. They can register to vote as late as when they vote on election day, or if they vote early, they can do it then as well. So we have very amenable voting laws here in the state of New Mexico. If people would like to register their views as we head into November, we have obviously a presidential election. Incredible chaos going on with that, but you can turn on your local cable channel and find out all you want to find out about the candidates.
What's your opinion with the Rio Grande Foundation? Is some of this information true or false now?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of truth and falsity. I would say that the main thing right now is defining Kamala Harris's record. She said a lot of things in the Democratic primary in 2019. Those things she's often trying to walk back and say, no, I disagree with myself from a few years ago. And that's part of the dynamic of just the process that she's had the opportunity to pursue here. She didn't have a primary for the Democrats, so she can say, oh, I didn't make those positions. Those statements are old news now because Biden left the race, and now it's hers to take on, and it's going to be, by all accounts, a very, very close election. Now,
and in your lifetime, and my lifetime, and our viewers' lifetime, have we ever seen such chaos? We had a former president who is a candidate for president get shot.
Right.
We have a person who went through the process, the current president, have relinquished his electoral votes, or not his primary election. Right. I mean, have you seen anything such as this?
No, in fact, my family, one of the decorations we use in our bathrooms around the house is framed newspapers, and I have 2 framed newspapers ready to go, one of Biden dropping out and the other of Trump's assassination attempt. So those are being added to the wall. And I have an Albuquerque Journal from the day after Kennedy was shot. So I have a lot of old newspapers, including VJ Day, Victory Over Japan, going back several years. This one will be an interesting addition to the wall and something I can tell my kids and grandkids about all the things that went on. But here in New Mexico, obviously the presidential election is critical. But right after that, in my opinion, is...
But the president, are we in play? Do you think New Mexico is in play in all these electoral votes that are needed? I mean, you hear we hear, and what do we have, 5 electoral votes?
Yeah, you take your numbers of members of Congress, the House, and then add the Senate.
I just heard on the mainstream media news, just one vote, one precinct, I think in Nebraska has 1 vote, and that's going to count because it could be even. What, 260 and 260, and just that 1 vote in Nebraska could determine the presidential election. But what about New Mexico?
Well, my bet would be that we are not going to be in play. I think that was trending to the possible when Biden was still in the race and his decline was evident and the media started attacking him. Of course, the mainstream media wanted a new candidate as well. Kamala Harris, so far, she's not being asked a lot of questions. We'll see what happens in terms of highlighting Kamala Harris's record as AG and in politics over many, many years, including the vice presidency that she's been a part of with the Biden administration.
But our 5 electoral votes, will they matter?
I would be shocked if
I shouldn't say, of course they matter, voters.
I would be shocked if they went to President Trump. We voted Democrat since 2004. That was George W. Bush's re-election. We narrowly went for Bush that year. New Mexico's become a pretty safe blue state in presidential elections. Doesn't mean it has to be, but it is for the time being.
That's for the president, but here are a lot of local statewide elections as
Absolutely. All 112 members of the New Mexico legislature are up. Obviously, not all of them have general election opponents. Some of the races were decided back in June in our primary elections.
And you mean that because there wasn't an opponent to run in November?
Yeah.
If a Democrat won in the primary, they'll hold a seat because there's no Republican vote to vote.
That can happen in a Republican district or a Democrat district. It tends to be in districts where there's not a lot of competition, where it's one party or the other. But it is worth noting the June primaries because Democrats have a control over New Mexico in the legislature, and the progressive side of the Democratic Party increased their control over the legislature. There were some races, I won't get into specific candidates, but just suffice it to say that there were some moderate Democrats who voted against things like paid family leave in the last session, narrowly defeated that, voted against gun control that was pushed by the governor, voted against other policies, including the clean fuel standard, which ultimately did pass, but it passed more narrowly than it would have otherwise. So a handful, a small number, 3 or so of those moderate Democrats lost their primary races, but that's enough to make some of these other priorities for the governor and the progressive base pass if the numbers are exactly the same in Santa Fe. So what we're looking at for the general election is, can Republicans gain some seats and kind of hold serve at least, or can they eat into the Democrats' majority? I think much like New Mexico going for Trump, which is highly unlikely, also highly unlikely would be a switch in party control of either house. There was at least a plausible chance of that when Biden was in the race, and it looked like Democratic base was going to be really depressed in their turnout. But I would highly doubt that that kind of thing is going to happen in this general election.
And a number of the moderate centrist Democrats were primaried in the election, or those who voted against some of the governor's favorite projects were primaried by, that's an incumbent primaried by their own party.
Exactly.
And they were ousted at that point.
Exactly. So the Democrats have already kind of made that statement in their own party elections that they are going to continue moving to the political left and moving in a progressive way. And there's a lot of things to discuss about that and the issues why the Republican Party isn't so competitive, but it is clear from not just this, but other primary elections that the Democrats, could be because they're being funded by progressive interests, could be because the voters want that, could be a combination of those two.
Well, the voters want it because they're
Right.
voting for it.
Absolutely, but you also look at where the money's flowing in and who has the money, and I think that's critical as well. So,
What does the Rio Grande Foundation believe then regarding the possibility of increasing liberty, prosperity,
well,
and individual freedom and limited government and economic opportunities with this type of election?
at this point, it's not looking like there's going to be any much room for positive, reductions in the size and scope of government. Of course, the governor could always turn on a dime, and she has in the past. As you know, we're going to talk about crime in the special session here. The governor's been in office for 6 years and suddenly decides that crime is a high priority issue that she's going to call a special session. We're going to focus on. That could easily happen for other issues as well. So,
Well, we need possibly another election for that to happen.
Well-
Some people say she called, after 6 years in office, called on a special session on crime before an election.
right, but it wasn't her election. It's not her election. She'll be done in a couple of years from now. So I'm just saying that the governor can influence the role within her own party of what those legislators want to do. Now, I will say that based on the special session, based on fissures that are longstanding within the Democratic Party, the governor is right now not exactly popular with many members of her own party, but that doesn't mean they won't still vote for her policies if they do the things that she wants to do. They obviously rejected her on the special session and what she tried with
Which
some of these
cost
crime
us
bills.
as taxpayers $50,000, $60,000 to have this. Why do you think it was called?
That's an excellent question. I've spent 6 years trying to get an understanding of this governor and her mindsets and the way she approaches things. And I'm still baffled as anybody else because obviously, yes, crime is an issue in this state. Crime is specifically an issue in this city, Albuquerque, but the governor has not really addressed the issue in any substantive way. And by substantive, I mean, on one hand, the policy front, just the legislative policies. On the other hand, there's the bully pulpit. There's supporting tough on crime candidates in primaries, which she, of course, just got a bunch of progressives elected who are going to be more challenging to deal with on the crime issue. Then there's judges and the judges that she puts on the bench around the state and whether they're tough on crime. So then finally, the governor appeared with Mayor Tim Keller, the Albuquerque mayor, who's been notoriously not tough on crime. Instead of palling around and appearing at events with Mayor Keller, she should be critiquing and criticizing and telling him to get tougher on crime. So I don't understand that approach. It's not effective, and it's not especially, I don't think, great politics. Like I said, she is not running for re-election. She may run for the U.S. Senate or some other electoral opportunity in New Mexico at some future date when she's done with being governor. She could also get, if Kamala Harris were to win election, she might get a policy role, a cabinet level role in the Harris administration. But I don't know that doing a special session on crime was going to influence any of that one way or the other.
A special session on crime that failed.
Failed miserably, yes. And the governor blamed, rightfully, the Democrats of her own party, even though I think she could also get out a mirror and look at who's to blame in a lot of respects for the failure of the special session.
So is special money going to help Ruidoso fire?
That was the only thing
That's
that
the only thing.
passed.
But regarding the crime, number of bills, and they lasted 5 hours perhaps the session, and
Yeah.
it was over. And
Right.
but her fellow Democrats also asked her not to hold it since there wasn't a consensus either.
Right. I mean, I definitely take issue with the progressive approach to crime. They tend to be soft on crime, and they've helped us get to where we are, which is out of control crime issues in our state, in our biggest city. The mayor of Albuquerque is a former progressive legislator. He's governed as a very progressive mayor. So it is worth having these conversations, but I also knew that based on who is in the legislature, who runs the Democratic Party in Santa Fe, they were not going to go with the governor's plan. So it came down to Republicans sponsoring the bills that failed, and the governor ripping into the Democrats in the wake of the special session, saying that they failed her. So I don't know where that leaves her in her relationships with the Democrats in the legislature as we move forward, though.
Was it to use in the upcoming election that was the vote going to take effect, meaning the governor offered a special session so people in her own party could say, yes, I voted for Tough on Crime, and so in the general election they would have a platform to say, yes, I voted for Tough on Crime issues?
I would think, and again, this is me trying to understand the governor's psychology here, so I'm treading on thin ice. If she had wanted to make the legislators in her own party look good in advance of the the election, she should have had that conversation with them in advance and said, hey guys, this is what I'm planning to do. What do you think? Clearly they were not ready or willing to address any of these issues in that special session.
But do you believe voters want New Mexico to address crime, since New Mexico has the highest rate of violent crime after Alaska?
I do think that a lot of New Mexicans are frustrated with the crime and want something to be done, but I do think that there is a real question out there as to what can be done and how to do it. Obviously, we would like to see them vote in ways that encourage anti-crime policies, not just in the legislature, not just at the governor's level, but city council, mayor, judges, possibly, calling some soft on crime judges into question for their votes or their sentences or lack thereof, and policies that judges are carrying out as well. So there's retention elections and that kind of thing.
The gentleman who was murdered in Santa Fe, the 83-year-old citizen was murdered.
Right.
It goes back to, I think, the prosecutor, who this felon was left out of prison.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I was in charge, I can assure you that there would be a lot of activity and a lot of coverage about specific things going on to address crime. I'd be hiring more police officers. I would be making sure that the DOJ is no longer involved in the city of Albuquerque and its policing. I would probably fire Police Chief Medina, and I would get a lot of things going when it comes to tougher on crime. Having more police on the streets is absolutely critical, and really engaging and making sure that the criminal elements and the homeless population need to be marginalized and moved aside, either by putting them in jail or moving them off the streets.
On your website, give us the website.
RioGrandeFoundation.org.
Had a lot about the Legislative Finance Committee study regarding crime. I mean, they did a very thorough study, and you highlighted a lot of that on your page. And something you pointed out, that prison admissions don't keep pace with the criminal activity. What do you mean by that? Well, or what does the LFC mean by that?
The LFC did a report right before the special session. Essentially, they were talking about Bernalillo County, but let's be real, the problem of crime is more in Albuquerque proper as opposed to unincorporated areas of Bernalillo County. If you look at where the crime is happening, it's in the city, not in Harris or the East Mountains. I mean, there's crime obviously all over, and we all know this is an issue not just in our state but in our country. But the crime issue is really in the city of Albuquerque. And the LFC was essentially in this kind of gentle, coded language saying the mayor and to an extent city council and the police chief and the DOJ and the judges are not getting the job done when it came to crime. So it's not just me saying this, it's the Legislative Finance Committee. And for those who are unaware, the Legislative Finance Committee is essentially an internal think tank for the legislature. So they are paid, nonpartisan officials doing a variety of number crunching and reports on different policies that are enacted in Santa Fe. And they try to track them or understand what is going to happen when policies are enacted. Right now, they've been tracking Bernalillo County's crime issues, specifically really the city of Albuquerque.
And again, kind of gently saying, the prison admissions don't keep pace with the criminal activity. And what does that mean in layman's terms?
It means we've got a lot of bad guys running around on the streets of Albuquerque.
Because they're not in prison.
Because they're not they're not dealing with sentences that would keep them off the streets for a long time. Simple.
That's the clear-cut way of saying it. And the reason, again, is because the policies for the mayor, the police chief, and the judges.
Yep.
But the LFC is pointing that out about existing. Nominating judges, tough accountability gap doesn't equal the arrests, correct? And the criminal convictions.
Yeah, that's again findings from the Legislative Finance Committee that they, it's one of the things about running the Rio Grande Foundation. We are known as conservative. We look at things with a free market perspective, and that's not the perspective, obviously, of many of the legislators. Certainly, the Democrats that control things, whether it's the governor or the legislature, but when the Legislative Finance Committee says things, and they oftentimes, because they are responding more delicately to those political challenges, because their paychecks are ultimately the responsibility of the Democrats who control things, they say things and we highlight them and share them in ways that oftentimes these government reports just get buried and they become, the bottom of your parrot's birdcage because they don't want to talk about them. The politicians don't want to talk about them. But the LFC does a lot of great work. It's not always easily accessible. So the Rio Grande Foundation often does a little bit of an interpretive process by which we make the 50 to 80 to 150 page reports digestible, pulling out highlights for the average person that they can see, and then we share those with the political leadership, and hopefully they have some realistic discussions.
There's a lot of, and again, our taxpayers pay for the LFC. We are paying for these studies to be done, and I guess as a tax-paying New Mexican, we'd like someone to pay attention. And the Rio Grande Foundation is, but the legislature to pay. We paid for this 150-page report.
Right.
It's based on facts and figures, and don't put it in the parakeet cage.
Exactly.
And it pointed out a key to our crime is getting young men into the workforce and, of course, improving education so these young men.
Right.
And why I say young men, they're the ones committing the crimes.
Absolutely.
But they're not in the workforce, they're out there robbing us.
Right. That was a separate Legislative Finance Committee report, and one that we've talked about quite a bit because we've really focused at Rio Grande Foundation on workforce participation issues. You often hear these numbers about unemployment, and it's dropping, and it's really low. Well, that's because you have to be looking for work to be counted in unemployment. If you are at home on your mom's couch or in your mom's basement or whatever you're doing, or you're just not looking for work, you are not counted. And that's where you get a lot of these disconnected young people. Obviously, males of a certain age are the biggest challenge. But this is a demographic that not just needs a job, they need to be either working or in the education system, preferably. And they need to be productive citizens, getting together physically, often in a workplace, having a paycheck that they are receiving for responsible behavior and doing the work, and then hopefully they're getting married and having children and contributing to the future of our society. And the Legislative Finance Committee did say and has been tracking this, and I like to think that Rio Grande Foundation helped kind of nudge them in this direction because they weren't talking about it a few years ago. And then they have said that, if you want to address crime issues, you've got to boost the percentage of your population that's working. And New Mexico has a low workforce participation rate. It's not a surprise, given our crime issues and given other challenges. So, and obviously the kind of linchpin of the whole thing is making sure that these young people get educated and having an education system that does the job. And I don't have to cite the number of studies from all over the country, most notably, of course, Kids Count, the report by the Annie E. Casey Foundation, which again found us overall in 50th place and found our education system in particular was an obstacle to growth as a state. And anybody who looks at relocating family or relocating jobs and economic activity to our state, they look at our education system and say, I think that's going to be a huge stumbling block. And there are ways forward. We talk about school choice and empowering parents to direct the dollars rather than government bureaucrats. There's also the Mississippi model, which encourages, as Susana Martinez did, the former governor, fourth grade reading and really emphasizing investments in early childhood reading and holding kids back who can't read.
When you explain it, Paul, it sounds rather simple.
It is pretty simple, honestly.
Educate them and have a job available for them once they're educated.
Yes.
Solve the crime problem. They're not on the streets. They're not shooting a gun on
You
Central Avenue.
solve a lot of aspects of the crime problem. There's no perfect solutions in this world. There's no paradise, but we think we can do a lot better.
Paul Gessing, the president of the Rio Grande Foundation, thank you for all you've done in our community. How many years have you been here, the Rio Grande?
18.
Oh. Ooh, it seems just like
2006.
It seemed like just yesterday.
I know.
You'll be back before the end of the year to talk about all the money we have for the legislature. But again, thank you for coming in, talking about this non-starter special session and talking about crime and the importance of getting out and voting. So appreciate all the Rio Grande Foundation and you, Paul Gessing, are doing to improve New Mexico.
Thank you, Diane.
Appreciate that. And thanks to KCHF TV for bringing you this program with Paul in it and Diane. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Issues and Answers with your host Diane Kinnewater is presented as a public service to inform, educate, and better the lives of New Mexicans. To comment on today's program or to purchase a copy of any Issues and Answers program, visit sunbroadcasting.org or call us at 505-345-1991.